Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? All right. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed your morning for Odoo Connect. Oops. For Odoo Connect, this is a first edition. And we are going to spend the next 50 minutes talking about Odoo and JavaScript. But first, I guess I'll wait 1 more minute. Please. All right. Before let me introduce myself quickly. My name is Géry de Bonny. I come all the way from Belgium to talk about JavaScript. And I'm kind of obsessed with JavaScript. Since I started working at Odoo, I was more and more involved in the Odoo JavaScript ecosystem. This involves documentation, tests, the code source, of course, also technical vision, onboarding new developers. Try to improve it and to make it better. But still a difficult task, of course. And today, for this talk, tell you about my vision for the current state of the Odoo ecosystem. And I will explain what challenges we are facing and how we are going to solve those challenges for the next versions. So this talk is more oriented toward the future than the past. Before I get, of course, this is a technical talk. I didn't exactly know what to expect coming up to this event because it's the first edition. So I will assume that you have some knowledge of JavaScript or at least some interest. But don't worry, I will not show you thousands of lines of code. I will keep a high-level overview of what we are doing. All right, so we go to the future. I kind of have to tell you about the current state of Odoo. As you know, Odoo released its version 13 a few weeks ago. In my opinion, it's a pretty good release. It has a lot of changes in the code base, in the JavaScript code base. But I will not tell you about all of those changes because most of them are kind of small and interesting to listen to someone talk for 1 hour through bullet points. So I will highlight just a few changes and tell you how difficult or how hard they were to make to give you some perspective on the expressiveness of our current framework. Let's get started with the first change that I want to highlight. Odoo version 13 is now a better citizen web. In version 12, some requests that were made by the web client were using the get method, the post method, as the HTTP communication layer. We changed those to, which allows us to use better strategies for cache control, for caching assets, and generating hash-based URLs. All of this made web client much faster in some cases. For example, when you reload your web browser, it's now much faster. So this is pretty good value for a change. It improves the experience for users. And at the same time, it was not difficult to make for one simple reason. The communication layer was properly abstracted in the lower level of the code base. And since it was well abstracted away, it did not impact the rest of the code base. So changing this was quite straightforward. And that's the next change that I want to mention. Odoo version 12 and before used jQuery for asynchronous work. It used the concept, the notion of deferred. That's what it's called. And those deferred are used to coordinate asynchronous work. And the Odoo client is actually very heavy on concurrency. Let me give you some examples. When some user edits a form view and then changes some field value, many times this triggers a non-change. This means that your web client needs to talk to the server. This takes some amount of time for that request to get to the server and then to come back to get some field values. For this amount of time, the user may have clicked on another field, change a different field, and other change again. Maybe he reordered its one-to-many list view. Anything could happen. And we need to make sure that all of these changes are properly managed. You do not want those changes to interleave and to leave the user interface in a corrupted state. So the requirement is very heavy on concurrency. And we use that deferred abstraction to manage that. But when we wanted to update jQuery from version 2.x to version 3, we had a big issue. jQuery 3 changed the semantics of the abstraction. They changed the deferred to make it closer to the native promise API. It's a good change for jQuery, but at the same time, it was really tricky for us because our code base was really dependent on the previous behavior. And this means that we had to update all of our asynchronous code at once to make it work with this new jQuery deferred. So we decided at the same time then to stop using this abstraction, which was no longer useful because now all of your web browsers have a native promise API, which is native, which is faster, and which will probably not change. That's a good property for an abstraction. So this change took us a lot of work. It like 3 or 4 months of work just to jQuery from one version to the next. But of course, now we have the benefit of using native promise API. And this means that any new code using client will use this promise API as well. Okay? So that's an internal change, but it's a pretty significant. Let's talk about other changes. As you probably saw this morning on the keynote, we introduced 2 new views in Odoo, a map view and a Gantt view. The map view, both of those projects were very interesting because you don't often have the opportunity to start a project from scratch. Most of the time, you have in Odoo, when you work at Odoo, you have to interact with existing code. You have to understand how it is designed, how it works, and then you have to make sure that it still works after you make your change. This was not the case for these views. The map view and the Gantt view were started from scratch. We did not have the history making it more difficult to work on that. And for example, the map view took us, the first prototype of the map view took about 2 hours of work. So that's really, really fast. Of course, it was not many features, but it was really quick to get started. And the same happened for the Gantt view. It was really quick to iterate. When you don't have to maintain all, you can go faster. And this was really nice to see the developer working on those projects. They could make some improvements, then check and discuss what needs to be done, to then iterate and maybe change again. And it was really quite fast, considering the amount of work it was required to do that. So this means that our views abstraction, our views code is not so bad. It works. It's quite easy to integrate and to create new views. That's a good point for Odoo. That's unlike the next change, and it's the last one I want to highlight today. This is actually not one change. It's a bunch. It's about a bunch of changes. The screenshot shows a search panel on the left part of the Kanban view. It's now available on all of the user interface, all of the multi-record views. It's one of the new features. You may have noticed this morning that we added a lot of new features for the list views. For example, you can now you can edit multiple records at once. That's a pretty big change. You can resize columns in list views. That's another big change. I'll talk about that later. what else can you do? You can edit grouped list view. Now, when you have a grouped list views, every record is still editable. It can be editable. We improved the search view, the date filters. We made a lot of small improvements in the list view mainly. And by contrast, it's the opposite of the previous slides. Those changes were so much harder to make because the code base was not designed for this, and we had to make sure that all of these new features interact well with the previous ones. So let me give you an idea of the complexity of the task that those features have to solve. For example, a user can do a lot of actions which needs to work as expected. The user can maybe edit one record, then switch to grouped list view, then edit another record, maybe resize a column before the edition is completed. It should work. Then maybe switch to the next record, then could reorder a column, and before it's done, it could edit another record. All of those actions need to work well. And that's a key point in what we do. It's that we need to think about transitions. When you work with your Odoo framework, you have to think about going the way you should go from one state to the next state. You need to describe a sequence of steps to update the user interface to go from a given state to another one. When the user clicks on the drop-down, then you need to, it's easy in this case, you need to simply display the drop-down. Then when you change something, you need to instantiate a new widget. You need to put it at the correct way if the user did some other action. And you need to coordinate all those widgets together. Then you need to make sure that the initial state matches the user interface. And this way of working, of thinking in transition, I would say about imperative thinking. It's about a sequence of steps. It makes it difficult to add features in Odoo. So this got me thinking. We have some changes are very easy to make, even if they look difficult, and some other changes are very difficult to make. Just resizing the columns in the list view, it took us, I don't know how many hours of work of discussions to make sure that this resize feature works as expected for use case. There was always some edge case that makes an issue, and then you need to solve that. You have another problem which arises as a consequence. It's all the time. It's like when you solve a problem, you have another problem which comes up, and then you have another one, and then another one, and it's so difficult. Why is it so? Because we are working with an imperative mindset. And I wanted to understand where that complexity comes from. Is there something wrong in our way of doing? We managed to have a really web client which works quite well, really it's quite solid. It does not crash. It's solid. It's good software, but it's really difficult. So this slide shows you some part of the code which is in the action manager, and this is about notifying an action that it has been attached to the DOM. Because when you work in a framework, in a widget, you often need to be able to know when your widget is present inside the DOM, so you can measure it or you can interact with some external libraries. This is really a need that our framework does not solve. So we have to add this feature back on top of the framework. This code is basically about going from the top of the component tree, and then any time something changes, we need to notify recursively all of the children components. And then it's only half the story. You have the other half, which is about detaching your component. You need to notify a component when it has been detached. And you have
such complexity that you need to do at every level of your component tree. If one of these elements does not do it, any of its children will not be notified if it's in the DOM or not. So it's complex, and it doesn't look right to me. When you work with other frameworks, such as React or Vue, it's built in. You have a lifecycle method. You have a component did mount or component will unmount method, and it simply works. You don't have to jump to all those hoops to make it work. So that's one point. We have not enough support from our framework. It's actually quite small. It's just a class definition of a Odoo class system. Then you have the widget system, a utility function. It's quite small, and it does not do enough work for us. So we have to add a lot of things, to add a lot of work to get what we need. So that's one point. Another point is that when you look at the front-end world, this is an example from Vue. It's a simple snippet. It's quite simple. You describe your user interface. You have a template, and you say, OK, I want one component, one specific component here. And you do not need to describe a sequence of steps to get there. You do not need to instantiate manually at the proper timing some sub-component, then to append it to the DOM, and then to wait for this operation to be completed before your parent component is appended to the DOM. It's a declarative mindset. You just declare your user interface as a function of your state. And then, whenever you need to add a feature, you update this template, and maybe you update some JavaScript code to update its internal state, and the framework will do the work of adding or removing and notifying all those subcomponents. So it's quite pleasant working with those frameworks. And I'll come back to this slide. It's kind of not nice doing it in Odoo JavaScript land. So at least two main sources of complexity. We think in imperative, with an imperative mindset. We need to manage all transition as a sequence of steps, and we do not have enough support from our framework. So yeah, that's one source of complexity. That's two sources of complexity, and we need some change. And let me give you a quote from Anthony, my boss. He told me this year at my performance appraisal that Odoo is too stable. It sounds good, right? If I tell you that Odoo does not crash that much, it's a good property. Odoo works as expected. That's good. But in this quote, Anthony meant that we are still stuck in the ways of the past. And if you ever worked with Odoo JavaScript code, you probably noticed that it's the state of the art really evolved so fast these last 5 years, and Odoo is still stuck 5 years in the past. We're still stuck in the backbone era now that people are working with React or Vue. And it's an issue because we are crumbling under our own complexity. It's difficult to onboard new developers. They are scared when they see the code base because where should you start? It's difficult to understand. You have to do so much work to add a feature. So we need some change. Even though we use stability, we want our framework to be stable, but at the same time, we do not want to pay the cost of having a framework which does not scale to large and complex applications. So we need change, and that's the topic of this section. I want to tell you about what we want to do. As I told you, we did not do enough work at the framework level. We need to do more work at in the extra work in the upper layer. We would like a declarative component system such as React or Vue. That's so much nicer than having to do it yourself. And we would like to shift the Odoo JavaScript framework too declarative mindset. We want to declare our user interface and let the framework do the work of making it happen on the screen. So the question then arises, what do we do? We know what we want, but how do we get there? Should we pick a state-of-the-art, well-tested, well-known, battle-tested framework, such as React or Vue? Or maybe should we make our own custom framework, which is not well-tested, which is unknown, not battle-tested? I don't know what you guys think. Maybe you can guess the answer to that question. But let me develop first, and then I'll come back to this. What does Odoo need? Those are some constraints given to me by Anthony. It still wants this future system to be QWeb or XML based. And that's very important. Many applications do not have a templating system based on XML, but in my opinion, it's a very good advantage of working in Odoo. Your user interface is encoded in XML documents, and you can update it with XPath. You can inherit those templates. You can change it. You can store them in database and then update them dynamically. It's very powerful. So we do not want to lose that good property. Another property that we want to have is we want our component system to be monkey patchable. It's kind of a dirty word, and I agree, but it's the way Odoo works. Odoo works in the opposite way of most applications. In Odoo, you have your base add-on, which is in the web client, which in our case, the web client /web. And then all of external add-ons, when you install them, can modify the behavior of the base add-on class and components. It's the same, actually, if you think about it, it's the same on the server side. When you have some model, like REST partner or sale order, whenever you install a new add-on, it can modify those models by adding new fields or overriding some method. And it's monkey patching. It's really not the perfect way, but it works really well for Odoo. So we still want our system to be monkey patchable. And last request, we cannot use external tooling. We cannot use NPM or the TypeScript or some kind of transpilation system to transpile JSX files to JavaScript or to transpile Vue file to JavaScript. We cannot use all of that for good and bad reason. Anthony does not like that, so that's not really a good reason, but that's one reason. But also for good reason, because we do not want to depend on external tooling. We do not want to install those additional programs on our production database, our production systems. If you think about it, those three constraints makes it difficult to use React or Vue. If you wanted to use React, for example, you would need to have some kind of layers, translation layers between a QWeb template and a React render function. That's kind of awkward to have. If you think about it, React and Vue are moving towards functional components for good reasons. The functional components are wonderful, but they are difficult to extend, to monkey patch, because the state of those functional components is locked inside closures or maybe inside the internal system of React or Vue, and it's very difficult to get through the abstraction to change them. So that makes it difficult. And also, no extra tooling makes it obviously not as nice to use those systems. Next, we have nice to have properties. This is not really mandatory, but it's something that we would like to keep or to have if possible. We would like our framework system to work well with inheritance. The state-of-the-art moves toward composition. When you want to reuse code, most of the time, composition is the proper way to do it. But if you think about it again, our templates are inherited. When you have XPath, you have inherited, you have sub-templates and sub-templates, and it would be really useful, it is useful, if your component system can reuse those templates at the same time. If you have an abstraction which matches this inheritance system on your template. That's one point. We also would like template compilation on browser. And that's really powerful for example, the form view, because the web client does not know beforehand what the user interface will look like. It only knows it at runtime. When the user opens the form view, only then the web client fetch the description of the form view from the server, and then decide how to translate that into a user interface. So we need that property, and we need, it would be also useful to have asynchronous rendering, because that's one of the few strong points of current widgets. Odoo current widgets have one hook, which is will start, and this hook is key to stopping user interface until it's ready. And because of, thanks to that system, you have a kind of a specific Odoo experience. When you use the Odoo web client, you do not see white space, then we wait half a second before it's filled with data. It's wait for your data to be ready, and then only then it will display the form view, for example. And it's nice to have. And funnily enough, React announced their concurrent system just a few weeks ago. So React is working on this, but it's still experimental. I believe that Vue 3 will have some kind of asynchronous feature, but it's not ready yet. So, so the question, the answer to this question is that yes, we decided to make our own custom framework. We wanted to experiment with adding a component system on top of QWeb. So that was our starting point. We just wanted to add one directive, T component, or T widget, it was named T widget back then, to the QWeb to let us create widgets inside templates. That was the starting point. And this starting point evolved into a full-blown, but still minimalist web framework. This is what we call OWL, which stands for Odoo Web Library. Odoo Web Library is, at its heart, is only a declarative component system based on QWeb. There is not much more than that at first. And then it kind of grew and more interesting, more solid with time. It works. So let me take some moment to describe what OWL is. OWL is standalone. That's, in my opinion, it's a big point. It means that you can use OWL for your own projects if you want, of course, but even for Odoo, it's really interesting. It means that OWL can be used for all Odoo-related applications which are not inside the web client. For example, Odoo SH could be done in OWL, or our runbot, or internal applications. Anything can be done with just with this, instead of having to try to extract from the current web client enough files to make it work, but it will not be guaranteed to work. So OWL is standalone. It does not depend on Odoo, even though it's built for Odoo. It's a decorative component system. It's class-based, so it can be simply monkey-patched by just changing the prototype, its prototype. It's really plain JavaScript. It's based on QWeb. It's no-nonsense. It has a lot of modern features. For example, it has slots, just like Vue. It was inspired, the way to make generic components was inspired by Vue, and it has slots. It has reactiveness like with hooks, just like now React or Vue 3 will get that as well. It has all of the modern good property, in my opinion, and all of it inside a small minimalistic framework, which is named OWL. So let me give you an example, so we can have a more concrete idea of what it looks like. This is a simple counter component. When you click on it, it increases its number. That's it. It's just a demonstration, toy example, but it's interesting to see that. It's simply a subclass of the OWL component class, and it has a template. In this case, I defined it inline, but you do not have to do that. For Odoo, we will still keep defining our templates in XML files, But for this example, it's inline, so it's easier to see it. And you have, you can see you have additional directives. You have T-on click. The T-on directive is just a new directive which is useful to bind event handlers on the click event. And whenever this click handler is triggered, it will just run this code. It could be a method inside your template, your component, or it's just a simple inline statement which increases its value. And then you have the state, use state, the state object. It could be just a plain object, but in this case, it uses the use state hook. The use state hook makes it reactive. So whenever its value is changed, OWL knows that it should update the user interface to match its internal state. And that's it. There is nothing more to that. No code for this component. It simply works like this. Let me show you composition. This is one parent component which imports the other component here, the counter component, with a TIF statement, just like standard QWeb. And in this case, you can see that we have the result is simply the parent component which contains a sum component. And if for some reason its flag was set to false, then of course it would destroy the counter component. It will unmount it, and it will work like you would expect from any component system. We have some teams working on OWL, and I can tell you that our own internal developers, those of them which are used to React or Vue, have a really easy time picking up OWL because it's really what we expect. Performance is not the key point. It was not the goal that we had in mind when we started working on OWL, but it's good to know that it's much faster than the Odoo legacy widgets, and it's still about the same speed as React or Vue on various benchmarking. So that's good to know. It's pretty good. You can try it online. So let me show you. Maybe here you have a playground application. In this case, you can just switch between examples. So, for example, let's have a look at to-do list. You can click here, and then you can try this framework like this. So hello, and then it's just an iframe with your own application on the right part of the screen. And you can, of course, update your template inline. If I change the text here, you run it, then you get your updated application running. And its standalone does not depend on Odoo. That's to. We can try some effects. For example, you have here transitions. It's a really live component, but you can have an effect for some basic animation. I don't know what else. You can have components, maybe responsive application. That's interesting to see. If you change the size of this iframe, it will switch from mobile mode to a desktop mode, and there is no code no extra JavaScript code to do that. That's really a good use case for OWL, because if you think of how you would do that in standard Odoo, you would need to have some kind of listener to the width of your window, and then whenever you switch state, you need to destroy all of the previous widgets, and then to reposition them or to move them around to switch manually. And it's very difficult to do because your code which manage this switch from desktop mode to mobile mode is not aware of the specific widgets that is running. The best person that could describe how it should look like, it should be the component itself that should describe how it should look like in mobile mode or in desktop mode. And I don't know if you can read that. Let's have a look. Here, in this case, this line just has a t-if statement env.isMobile. This is the environment. And this means that whenever the isMobile flag is false, then the mobile search view will disappear. And whenever it's true, it will simply appear. And this means that you can add reactive responsivity to your application by simply modifying this template. And you do not have to fiddle with JavaScript in this example. So I think that's a pretty good example of the power that any framework, any modern framework can give you. So that's a good demonstration. All right. I think Odoo version 14 will be the start of a new beginning for the JavaScript, the old JavaScript framework. We are working on updating all of our current to this old framework. All new code will be written with OWL, obviously. And we have like, currently you have 3 teams, point of sale, discuss, and maybe BI team working on it's been a few months they started. It should land in Odoo in the next month. And at the same time, we will update as much as we can from the Odoo web client. For example, we'll start with the app switcher, and then once this lands in master, we'll update probably on the first top-down, bottom-up. Yeah, bottom-up. We'll update client actions. We will update some widgets, and progressively we will try to update the whole user interface to use all. So it's really difficult to say beforehand how much time this will take because I cannot divine the future, and also my strong. So it's difficult to say. I expect this to take at least 1 year, maybe more, but the future will tell us. So I think I've been quite quick. So thank you for your attention. I hope that this is interesting to you, and I will be happy to answer your questions right now or maybe in the next few days. Thank you again. I think there is one question just over there.
I have 2 actually. First of all,
there's a microphone if you want. Yes.
You'd said that this is not dependent on the Odoo framework.
Yeah.
So, do you expect that people would use this, like to build an SPA, say with a Django backend or some other backend? Do you really expect that that's going to happen? Do you hope that it happens?
I would hope it happens, but I don't really expect it for now. But even now, in my opinion, but I'm completely biased, in my opinion, it's a really good framework. It solves really well problems. And maybe if some developers is used to work with our framework in the context of Odoo, maybe it will like to use it for other use. But it's not really. The point for Odoo is not to do that. It's still standalone. In my opinion, it will be at least in the first. At first, it will be used for Odoo-related applications because it will be part of the ecosystem. But maybe, who knows, someday some people will use it. I don't know. Some people don't believe it, but it's most likely that it will stay a small framework, not really kind of a niche. But who knows? Yeah. I can't tell you more. It's difficult to predict the future.
Well, I did have one other question.
Yeah?
And I agree with what you said there. If you're used to Odoo, this might nicely cross-pollinate to something else.
It makes sense if you have, for example, a single-page application that you want to offer some customer in Odoo. You can just host it on your, make an Odoo add-on and interact directly with the Odoo database. the Odoo system without having to, and you can maybe reuse some components between your backend and your application. It could happen.
That's sort of related to my next question. Do we have to wait till 14 comes out, or do you expect that people will build interaction with, say, version 12 or version 11?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Can you run both the old backbone and this side by side? In other words, if we make a custom app, a bespoke app for your internal company, will we be able to build it on OWL instead of?
Yes, you could definitely do that. Now there is I gave you the there it is. This is the OWL repository for OWL. You can download the release, the last release, which is 1.0 something alpha. And you can download it and use it for your own project. It will be available to do only in the next month in master. So, but you can still use it in your previous version. It's standalone. You do whatever you want. Just like you could use React or Vue in Odoo. Odoo does not care the server. So you can do that. It will be available in the next month, I expect, in master. Yes.
Hi. So one of the reasons you mentioned that you went with your own framework is that you didn't want to depend on other tooling such as NPM. Well, are you considering making the Odoo server have such features like spin up a development server that automatically refreshes the application, etc., so that it is more convenient to use for front-end development?
Yes, I did it for my own project. Since I was working on OWL, I started making some personal projects with it, just to have a feel of what it could look like. And of course, I just made a small package.json file with a few NPM modules such as serve and all of that to have a live environment and to make it work. But it's a point. It does not depend on external tooling, but it means at the same time that it's easy to integrate with any other system because you just need to, you can load your templates the way you want. You can transpile or maybe minify the JavaScript code if you want or if you don't want. You can just have a simple HTML file with all of it inside. You do it the way you prefer. But for my own projects, I have a small file to start a project, maybe with all those goodies. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I wanted to add an extra point. I didn't talk about that, but it's completely documented, like 100%. If you can look here, you have a component, and you have complete documentation on how it works. So I think it's a good point. All right, any other question? Well, I'll be happy to answer your question later if you want. Thank you for your attention again.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Vanderscape. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Softyne, and we are a customer of Odoo. We've been using Odoo for about 4 or 5 years. And today I was going to step you through a little bit of how we use Odoo, which is a little bit untraditional. I heard you guys chatting about some woes, and we're very much in that case. So we've actually done quite a lot of custom development on top of Odoo. So a little bit about me. I've got a couple of passports added to that, married to a Brazilian, so one day I'll get to 4. I've spent the last 10 years or so building products destined for space or underwater. Today at Softyne, we're building what we consider the next generation of storage appliances, but also growing out into the data center. So we're a venture-backed company. We've raised about $30 million to date, doing a Series B, so if anyone's got any cash, I'll be out the back for coffees, taking all donations. Some of the cool products that I've worked on in the past, just because everyone loves pretty pictures, and this is kind of interesting. So we'll kind of move from right to left. So on the right, this is a Special Forces rebreather. It's the kind of thing you'd expect a Navy SEAL to be wearing, jumping out of a helicopter or out of a submarine. It basically recirculates gas. Very complex life support system. It's also got to be completely black, completely non-magnetic. We use lots of exotic materials. And we manage that in an ERP system called Glovia, which, if you come near it, run in the opposite direction as fast as you can. It's an absolute nightmare. Moving into some of the satellite stuff that we did, this was like a small device that allowed us to connect a Bluetooth phone to the Iridium satellites to send completely secure messages. But that's not what I'm here to talk to you about. I am here to talk to you about Odoo, but our Odoo history starts a long time ago and actually starts way back in 2010 when it was a little open source project called OpenERP. And if you are into music, on your spare time, you learn to play a new instrument. If you're into adrenaline sports, you jump out of planes. If you're an ops guy, you build an ERP system. That's how you kind of get going. So we played around with OpenERP, and we kind of have a fairly storied history in Dynamics, SAP, Glovia, and they're really great products if you're BMW or Boeing or doing something really, really large. But we're a cash-strapped startup that didn't have anywhere near the cash to go and pay a bunch of consultants to implement the project. And none of us come from a consulting background. We're all engineers. It's an engineers first company, and we really like to build stuff. So we started playing around with the project. We started to implement it in a previous chapter prior to Softyne, and then as we incorporated Softyne, we decided to kind of go all in. And there's a quote that's been floating around recently, which says, when you start a company, let the sales guy choose the CRM system, let the marketing team choose the marketing platform, and let support choose the ticketing platform. But when you've got a bunch of engineers, you just choose an ops system to kind of keep everyone on the rails. And that's how we ended up with Odoo. And we've really just grown into the modules. So from the beginning, we've always run a fully supported enterprise version of Odoo. My job is to grow the business, not to maintain uptime. And when we started the company, we needed everyone working on development engineering, not sort of sustaining the actual business. So we chose that. It was a really easy decision for us. We worked with a team here in San Francisco from sort of the beginning, and we've watched the Odoo family grow here in the US. We currently run 3 databases for our international operations, and we do that for a number of reasons, which I'll circle back to a little bit later, particularly around how we orchestrate those 3 instances. A lot of it has to do with the corporate structure and the way that we have to trade internationally between those entities, and I know that there's a talk this afternoon about how you can run it all into one instance. Prior to opening the Czech Republic entity, that was something that we actually did within Odoo. We ran the UK concurrently, and we decided to move away from that when we upgraded to version 12, and we're reasonably happy with that decision. We really use Odoo a little bit differently than, I guess, how it was intended. We use Odoo as a platform underpinning a lot of our business operations. So we've built a lot of modules on top of that, and quite often people come to us and say, well, why don't you just build a database yourself and create a data model and it'll be really easy. Back to my opening point of, I'm here to grow the business, not to maintain uptime. There's massive risks associated with doing that. So we're allowed to get the best of the Odoo development community and a regular update cadence without having to, maintain that ourselves. So I spoke about this a little bit. What we refer to this as the soft iron pyramid, which is unlike a lot of people building data center appliances, we literally do everything ourselves. We don't manufacture anything in Asia. We don't use a contract manufacturer to do PCB assembly. We write all the source code from the very first boot cycle that happens on the server. We design all of the circuit boards ourselves. We do SMT assembly just in the East Bay, not far from here. And we've grown that process out. It looks very much a lot more like an automotive assembly process or design and assembly process than what we're used to seeing inside servers. And this is a really cheesy Apple quote. Jeff Williams is the COO of Apple. But this is kind of a mantra that we operate behind as well, which is you can't have design and manufacturing and not have them talk to each other, because the reason that Apple is the single biggest united customer is there's 40 engineers flying between here and Shanghai this afternoon, and that happens every day. And that's because they're obviously at a much larger scale, but there's a handoff between design and manufacturing. And so if we have a look at what our products look like, this is a glimpse at the top level what it might look like at a rack. So we're switching, storage, and servers, but that's not really that interesting. It gets a bit more interesting when we take the lid off, and you can start to see how much more parts there are inside there. And remember that we're designing and manufacturing everything in here with the exception of the silicon. So there's quite a lot of parts that just go into that. And when we go a layer further into the design, you can see that there's even more parts. There's over 2,000 components that make up this printed circuit board, which all have to get managed, assembled, tracked. We have to deal with date codes expiring, so we have variants on parts. And what that means is lots and lots of stock components. Again, because we're not using a contract manufacturer, I've got all of these parts sitting in a warehouse just on the other side of the bay, which we have to manage. And so part of the Odoo story for us is that we absolutely love open source. Our software-defined storage appliances run Ceph. Our network switches run Sonic, which was built by Microsoft Azure for their Azure cloud, and they've open sourced it. We run Debian for the most part where we can. We use GitLab for source control, and we run Odoo. Important to point that we're not massive open source fanboys. It's just the right decision for us as a company, and it's also the way of the future at this point in time. Is even if you're paying for it, the idea that it's open source and there's more people contributing to it is really where we think enterprise IT is going in general. And so I wanted to spend the most time here talking about our custom applications, and hopefully the demo gods will be nice to me and we can do a live demo here of how that works. But we basically have two categories of products that we talk about when we integrate with Odoo, and those are internal tools that we use within the organization, and then customer-facing tools. And those are things that appear on our website or are more open to the public. And so the point here is that growing a manufacturing company is a real challenge. It's a challenge because there's lots of ways to get it wrong. It's really expensive if you get it wrong. And going down a custom path means that you generally have to commit some capital, you have to commit some resource, and you don't know if it's necessarily going to work. So obviously enough, we use Odoo for that. So here's an example of an internal system that we built for our sales team, who are generally on the road, incredibly remote, working all over the place. And you could look at this at first blush and consider, well, why didn't you do it in Odoo? The types of products that we're selling as a company and the types of configurations that we sell, it's more like selling a system. So there's lots of moving pieces. There's business rules associated with that as to whether those two pieces can be sold together. And then there's also technical reasons as to why we may or may not want to put certain parts together. So we have a modular approach in the way that we build our products, and the number of permutations just explode when you start to consider that there could be different types of media, different types of network, and put that all together. So we created a configurator, which is actually a customer-facing tool, which we'll jump to in a second. This is what we kind of consider the pro version of that, which is for our systems, solutions architects, and also our sales guys. But we leverage a lot of information in Odoo, and we don't replicate that data anywhere. So we use login wherever we can. The pricing, the part numbers, the descriptions of those parts are all coming out of Odoo. And when they go through the process of actually sending the quote, even though it's a standalone process where it looks like they're inside of our app, it's generating a PDF, it's pulling the sales order number from Odoo, it's writing the customer information into Odoo. It's really just a skin on top of that, but it allows us to have those business rules and other logic built in without the sales guys having to sort of get ramped up into using Odoo very much. And so then the second part of this is our customer tools. And we use these for pre-sales, which is what we call our configurator, which is on our website. We also use these for support. So we have a customer portal. When someone logs into that customer portal, little do they know they're actually logging into the help desk system of Odoo to create tickets and all of that information. And part of that is because of the nature of the products we're talking about, $1 million acquisitions, if not more. It's not about just saying, hey, I've got a server that's failed or I've got a hard drive that's failed. There's more information behind that, and we want to be able to track all of those things back. So we have this product called the configurator, which sits on our website, and it's time to hope the demo gods play nicely here. And so this is on our public website. You can go to this at any point in time. If you would like to know what 10 petabytes of all flash storage costs, you can dial all the way to the end, and you can see that it's about $9 million. If we bring this back down to something maybe a bit more closer to reality, we can go through this process, which is all being designed to filter down the products that we have, present pricing, which is a reasonably novel idea in enterprise storage that you would actually...
Was this built on the website or a different website?
No, it was built on a different website, yeah. So if we jump into this product here, which is our most popular, it's going to ask us how we would like to configure our Ceph estate. Based on the options, this is all React. It will basically give us a couple of options, and then this is the part of the show that we like to talk to. So this information I briefly touched on comes from Odoo, including the pricing information. And just to show that I'm not making this up, we're going to jump into my instance here. Like I said, we've got a couple of instances for the different countries. And so this is our US instance. We're running version 12. We're in line for version 13 when it happens. And we're going to jump into our master records. And the benefit of setting up the Odoo system is you know all the part numbers off the top of your head. So in this instance, this part is what we call IO100. It's a 10 gigabit network interface card. And you'll see in here, maybe we can zoom in a little bit, there's a couple of custom fields that we put into here through Studio. And the first one is very simply a true or false flag. That gets ticked, and in the back end of the system, it will actually say, hey, there's kind of something going on with this part. I need to present that to the configurator. There's a name and a description, and the description field is what we're going to play with. hopefully if anyone's buying something right now, they'll be thoroughly confused. So right now what's happening is we have basically a loop that happens within our application that's going to run, and it's going to call Odoo and say, hey, here's my list of parts that I know. And so that backend stack is Java, Tomcat, and Jersey, backed with a MariaDB. That DB is only used to cache constrained data for our configurator. So we have these complex business rules as to which pieces can go in what appliance. And that's all kind of happening in the background. So, all thing going well, if we start a new instance of our configurator here, and we jump in, we can pick generally any product. And I've done it too quickly, so we'll have to give it another minute or so. We generally have this running on about a 5-minute cycle, just because in the real world we're not making dynamic changes. Obviously, if I did it right as it had just done a refresh, we have to wait that whole minute. We did kind of increase that. So this application, we can kind of play with it through the rest of the cycle while we're waiting, allows a user to get a good idea of exactly what it is that they're going to get inside their cluster for a storage array. We can go through this process of basically we save a configuration. When we do that, we do create an opportunity record in Odoo, and that's tied to a very basic set of data that's put in by the user, and it helps to store that. The end goal with this product, as it sits on our website, is to increase the amount of information that it's putting into Odoo. So it really acts as almost like a pre-sales function to create customer records, which then allows us to go all the way through. And then what we'll do is see if we can bug it out by jumping into a new window here. And there we go. It actually works. So the demo gods are with me. So we probably should then jump back into Odoo quickly and change that before we end up with some very strange comments. So in this instance as well, we actually use the configurator description is the same as the internal reference. That's not true across all of our products, which is why we have that separate input. The configurator type that we show in here is actually used in sort of our business logic to work out how we can use things and whatever else. To your question about the website, this is actually just sitting inside of our WordPress instance. So we have WordPress. It's a data-driven React embed that's just running in the back, and it's responsive, so you can run it on a mobile, run it on an iPad. And that's about it. If there's any more questions, and I have to put up this slide because it's my job. We are hiring people, so if you have any. Sure.
Do you handle progressive billing? Like, how would you handle that where it's like
How do you handle things like progressive billing where it's like you have a down payment, a portion, and then a concluding payment? Because that's something that we run into on some of our more expensive things.
Yeah, so we actually don't use Odoo necessarily for our cash book sort of side of that. So we are still running QuickBooks concurrently. So a lot of our financial transactions will run that way. And that's something that is sort of tied into the way that we do all of our group consolidation with our accounting. And the reason that we haven't structured that is it's sort of gets complicated, but we're a UK topco with a US subsidiary. So we've tried to keep the accounting separate for now. That is something that we are changing. So the answer to your question is we kind of hand crank it at the moment, which is sort of the reality of small startup life.
So it looks like you built your website configurator there, and you're saying you don't customize Odoo. So why, just curious, why didn't you build it on Odoo instead of building your configurator website? Or at least make REST API calls to Odoo to power it instead of the, but maybe that was for efficiency or?
Yeah, so a lot of it just came down to the timeline for us to build that website was, you know, we had a bunch of React guys who could kind of throw into it. We are migrating a lot more of the way that we interact with Odoo into a RESTful API process. So we are building an internal tool at the moment for when we finish assembly of a part. So one of those network cards is an example. As part of the test scripts that will run to validate that it's passing traffic and doing everything, it will then generate a serial number and then close the work order inside Odoo for itself, which is all going to be done kind of natively on an API.
Anyone else? All right, thank you very much.
Great, thanks.